you can really identify a kind of particular culture of architecture in Ireland that's more difficult at this moment to identify a particular British culture, for example, of architecture. I think it's more difficult.
Okay, that it feels like a unified.
Yes, it feels like a yes, a kind of ongoing cultural movement, And although well, I have to confess, I mean, I don't know all the younger practices actually. So basically, my focus has been on De Blacam and Marr, and on Toomey O'Donnell, and on Ivan Farrell and Shelley McNamara of Grafton Architects. They have, and
But can I ask you, you're a historian. Is that how you would, architectural historian?
well, yes, by default, that's what I am. But I mean, I suppose I'm as much a kind of theorist as a particular kind of theorist, as opposed to just a historian. And in fact, yes, so there is still, it's still in print, but only just now it must be at least over 10 years since it was published, a collection of writings under the title Labour, Work and Architecture, and published by Fiden. It's a collection of essays, and
of your essays.
Yeah, and the editor categorized these essays into history, theory, and criticism. So certain essays appear under history like that, under sectors, history, theory, and criticism. But at some point, because I was slightly embarrassed by that
distinction
classification, I said, well, I think maybe I should. I'm not sure I'm really a theorist. I'm not. I am strictly a critic, and yeah, and so.
But
I'm not strictly a historian.
Yeah.
So I made a slightly pathetic remark that, well, I think I'm a writer on architecture, so I try to avoid the whole thing. Well, this is not something that took place publicly. It's something that, and if I remember correctly, it's not even written. Something maybe it is written, but I can't remember where. But it's something which I said to myself, really, basically.
Yeah. I guess the question of what you are maybe is also connected to the method. So I always wondered whether you interview, what's your method of accessing the knowledge? Is it purely looking? You go and you look, and it's when you're looking that you see the meaning or the intention.
Exactly.
But do you also talk to art? You also
of course. Yes.
So then you are all of those things.
Yes. And there's a building by me. It is by me, but done under the name of Douglas Stephen apartment.
All right.
Which exists in Bayswater, and which is a Grade 2 historic monument. It's from the 60s. From the early 60s, okay. And yeah, well, I'm very proud of that building. That I virtually designed everything in that building,
and does it embody any principles?
Well,
any theoretical principles when you look back?
It's very much influenced by the interwar between these. I think could be summed up as being influenced by the new objectivity, which of course means Biput and Deuter and the another factory in Rotterdam. And and also something maybe of Russian constructivism, and there are parts of the building which are directly influenced by Jim Sterling, and but
did you understand this influence as you were designing the building?
Yeah.
Did you very much think,
No.
this is how this person would do it?
Well,
Or this is how I wouldn't do it quite like that person, and this is my reaction to a very specific way of thinking.
well, I did. Yeah, I did. But I was very interested in Russian constructivism, and but actually this whole moment, this interwar moment in Europe, and but particularly in the Netherlands and to some extent in Germany and in Switzerland. Yeah, and so what is more important, maybe from the point of view of my writing, is that I think there's a certain quality it has, which is to do with the fact that I was trained as an architect, and I think like an architect, so that the writing, my writing is always written with this kind of mindset. So I think the quality of the writing, as opposed to someone trained in art history, is very much imbued with this way of looking at things.
It seems to be that connection to practice that really defines the profession.
I think so.
It's almost like it has to always acknowledge the practice of the complexity and difficulty, and in a way the pain, the stress of the practice.
Yes, and the intention behind. Well, architecture is a much more collective manifestation, I think. When you think about the way it is made, if you think about architectural offices and the complexity of a building and the number of people that are involved in working on that building, it's collective in that sense, and has been so for a long time. And it's collective also, I think, in a wider professional sense, in that there's a discourse, there's a discourse about the field which is open and as the word would suggest, discuss it. It's a very rich field, in a way in which, generally speaking, painting and sculpture are extremely individualistic expressions. And maybe the art form that comes closest to architecture is in fact film, because film is also collective. I mean, the number of people involved in making a film, and also the the discourse around film is also equally elaborate and covering.
Yes, cross-referential.
Yeah, cross-referential, exactly. And so while there is something of that in art history, it's very, I think the big difference is that in the field of art history, there is an, let's say, art historical critical discourse represented by magazines like October, but it is it's largely ignored by practicing artists. I mean, yes, particularly artists who are sort of still making paintings or sculpture, as opposed to I don't know what, installation artists or or video artist. So anyway,
It's interesting, that connection to film. Have you?
yeah,
This is again a slight diversion from the main topic, but have you engaged in a film sort
no,
of
well,
discourse on
no,
film?
I have actually, but there is well, he's no longer alive, but there was a documentary filmmaker in New York whose name was Michael Blackwood, of German origin, but living from when he was sort of 14 or something like that, living in the States, in New York. And at some point, he begins to make a series of films on architecture for German television. And I collaborate with him on one film after another. And we never do a film about the Irish, in fact, but about Japanese, Ando Izazaki, and about Southern European architects, like Peter Zumthor and Gulliksen Karamo Formula from Helsinki, and so on, And so those films are available. Because Blackwood's son put them all on the internet, so you can see them all. Anyway, so
I teach at the AATE, the units that I teach, we work with film a lot because we, I guess I'm quite interested in phenomenology and observation and close looking and things like that. So we use film a lot.
I'm also very interested in phenomenology, and well, you may have been present when the two Serbians presented just the magazine dedicated to artificial philosophy, and I still have to difficulty finding time to do all these things, but I still have to write a paper. Well, okay, it's a long story, too long to go into publicly, but I do want to attempt a paper on phenomenology in relation to architecture. But the fact is that I've never written an essay on the work of Shane de Blacam, de Blacam and Mard. I never written a kind of overview of it, and why I have a copy of this big Royal Academy book is because I was involved. Now let's see. I think it was in 2018. I'm not sure about that because it might have been the year before. That in the Venice Biennale, de Blacam and Mard made 3 handmade books of their work. And for a while, I had in my possession these 3 books, and after actually a number of years, as a matter of fact. Well, the idea was, and now probably it will never happen, is that, although it should happen, is that anyway, my publisher, Thames and Hudson, I thought about trying to get Thames and Hudson to do a book on a monograph on de Blacam and Mard, but and that was the intention, and the way. But that's very interesting also, because Shane was always somewhat aristocratic, too aristocratic about the whole idea of publishing anything. So he was not so enthusiastic, whereas John Marr was. Anyway, I end up with these volumes that had been part of had been the only thing of their manifestation in the Venice Biennale. And I had them with me for a long time, but finally they went back to Shane via Paul Keough, who maybe you do or don't know, who has a practice in Dublin, and who's plays a kind of public role in Dublin with regard to the Royal Institute of Irish Architects and all this kind of the Academy and so on. So he is still he's a figure that ought to be talked to, in fact, definitely. And Paul Keogh is studied in the Royal College of Art with John Miller, Edward Jones, myself, and Sue Rogers when that was first started. Anyway, this big, to sum up, I mean, this big Royal Academy format book exists, and I was looking at it this morning in preparation for coming here, and I noticed, it's broken down into 4 books. It's different from the smaller format, but contains the same or much of the same photographic material as in the smaller format. There's a special photographer whose name I don't remember, but clearly, they've used this one photographer all the time. And the 4 books are broken down into corner, works, houses, and circle. These 4 titles. Slightly funny taxonomy. And circle being mainly the Munster Institute of Technology.
Yeah.
And where quite obviously there is a Carnianism present there. Well, there is a Carnianism present in the work of de Blacam and Marr all over the place, I think there is some kind of division between Marr and de Blacam, in that Marr is less, I would say on balance, perhaps less influenced by Kahn and more influenced by Aalto. There is this corner building in Dublin that kind of breaks out in the Cantoribus corner.
It's an office building.
No, I don't think so. I think it's
yes.
It's residential.
It's residential.
Yeah, and that building is obviously influenced by Aalto, and probably by John. And I know, what I'm trying to say is I think maybe John was more involved with that building. And but what you can see certain works like houses in Portugal and in Spain, that, and even one house, is on the seafront near Dublin, where the kind of expression is a more open modernity than Kahn, a sort of more open modular, you can say that, more open modular modernity. And so that's something that breaks away from Kant, although clearly circle is extremely Kahnian, and the use of brick throughout is quite Kahnian, I think, and also the use of framing, the framed carpentry, joinery,
exactly, yeah.
Is obviously influenced by Kant.
Joinery is sort of slotted into the structure.
Yeah, right. Yeah. But the design of door frames and the panels in building door frames, very much Kant. And this Beckett Theatre in Trinity College, on the edge of Trinity College, is also obviously influenced by Kant. But at the same time, one has to say, that it's influenced by the Irish vernacular. It's a kind of barn, the Beckett Theatre, And it's very weird that in the Royal Academy 4 books, the Beckett Theatre is very poorly illustrated. There's one elevation and a deliberate corner shot between 2 buildings, of it. But it's such an important building, and in a way, it's underplayed by publication, I think. And so I think that, maybe the work becomes more of its own expressivities in things like the wooden building, for example, where the timber framing expressively becomes like a kind of crown of the building in a way. It's almost, I think, almost Persian in its feeling as it rises through the top of the building. And the brickwork, well, that's also interesting. You see, the brickwork in that building is
in the back here.
in the wooden
Oh, in the
wooden building, yeah, is perhaps more influenced by labyrinths than by Khan's, because of these thick mortar joints, you know, and that's not very Khaниan, you know. And it's maybe the only building where I'm not sure about that, where thick mortar joints are used by the Black Mama. But I think the use there, well, the whole building is very beautiful, I think. The use of the thick mortar joints in the brickwork against the kind of very expressive use of wooden framing is particularly successful in their works. And
how do you then see this? How do you see that influence that sort of picked up probably from when Shane was working and he was taught by Khan and then worked for him? Or, how do you feel that influence has been passed on to the next generation of architects that were sort of there?
You know, I don't see evidence of that happening. You know, but maybe.
Well,
I mean, you know,
Neil. I guess you could look at some of Neil's
yes,
projects.
but you know, it both is and I mean, it is and it is not influenced by Khan. I mean, what I think is amazing is that and for good reason, because in a way, you know, there's no, with few exceptions, there is one house, but there's very few works by Khan which are entirely in wood, whereas, you know, a lot of Neil's more extraordinary work is entirely in wooden construction, you know, and so that is so, you know, that already is a step away from Khan, you know, and simply because of the material, you know, and so, and you know, I haven't illustrated his most recent work, but I illustrated, you know, in I think it's Worcester College, Oxford. There are buildings by which I've never seen. I should really make an effort to see, you know, by him. Brilliant works, I think, and so he is an outstanding architect, practicing out of London, living, as I am aware, again in Dublin now, but commuting from Dublin to London, I believe, to continue the continuity of the office in London.
That is.
Yes, right now today.
You're saying Neil?
Yeah, he lives in Dublin and commutes to London.
I see. Okay,
yeah.
I didn't
only
know
just recently.
Okay.
In the last 6 months. I think.
Okay, I didn't know that.
Yeah, and so much was he. I once was at, maybe this is what, I don't know. I can't remember. 8 years ago or something like that. Maybe a bit more. I said to John Toomey, should we think of Neil as an Irish architect? He said, "Oh, we definitely should." You know, but I don't know. He established his practice in London. He may have built in Ireland now, but I think he's built almost nothing in Ireland. Yeah.
But there's a certain transfer. So maybe if ideas are not transferring from one to the other, there's a certain geographical line that's been drawn here between America, Dublin, and London. How do you think about? I mean, you yourself actually just came back. There's a certain transfer of ideas.
There is, but you know, I mean, you know, it's undeniable. One thing we can say, it's undeniable. There are certain works by the Blacam and Mark. Well, maybe the Munster Technical College, you know, which is where the presence of Khan is very evident, you know, even though the overall gestalt is not particularly Kahnian. The rhythm of the units is very Kahnian, you know, and also executed in brick. And if you shift from this issue of material, I think is very important. If you shift from brick to wood, in terms of Kahn's influence, then we've already discussed it, you know, because the framing, you know, and therefore the Beckett theater and so on is Kahnian. But if you think of the Trinity College library and dining hall, there is of course something of Kahn there, but it's much weaker, you know. It's more delicate in a way. It doesn't depend on the framing to such a degree, and so I think, you know, material, the use of material, I think is a big issue, you know, in terms of what gets transferred, you know, as a kind of tectonic image from one figure to the next, you know, and so. But maybe we should try to approach the whole thing differently. I mean,
I think maybe another way to approach it is to think of the uniqueness of, I think we might have spoken about this before, the uniqueness of Irish condition that allowed this culture, this very distinctive culture, to emerge. I mean, whether it's to do with having one central institution where all the ideas come together, or what is that about?
It's not so easy to answer, but one of the things I think which is unique is if you go back over the career of Grafton architects, they did a lot of work, you know, in small provincial towns throughout Ireland, you know, schools and libraries and things of that order. You know, they did a lot of work along those lines, and in fact, I'm profoundly involved with the break point in their career because I taught him in Drizio in the Accademia di Architettura, along with someone who actually has unfortunately suffered an aneurysm, so she's no longer the same person. But there was this very spirited and brilliant Italian architect named Silvio Malesi, who had been a key collaborator of Vittorio Grigotti in the magazine Casabella. And so Silvio and I taught studio together in Mendrisio, and we invited Grafton architects to teach there, you know. And the consequence of that is that because Silvio was married to a very distinguished economist in the Italian scene, she had the opportunity to organize, and then we did it together, an open competition for an expansion of Bocconi University, through the Bocconi University being more or less a business school. And so Malaysia and myself selected a short list, or I forget now, I think it's 12 different firms, all based in Europe. And one of them was Grafton Architects. So Grafton Architects win this competition. And there is a lot more to be said about that.
Yes, but they just completed that.
Well,
recently,
yes. Yeah. But also about the nature of the competition and so on. But you know, it's too much of a digression. But it changed the scale at which they were able to work. I mean, it's a very big building. So after this they received one commission or competition request for one big structure after another. I mean, made them basically. So
there's a certain versatility.
Well, they became architects at a scale which is which de Blacam and Marr never attained this scale, and nor did, not really, Toomey O'Donnell. I mean, Toomey O'Donnell came a little closer by virtue of the buildings they built here, and also in Budapest, if I remember correctly. They did a university building in Budapest, you know, with Soros as the...
They did do a significant building here in Holborn.
Yes, the thing for the
LSE.
LSE, yeah. Yes. Yeah. Yes, it's quite a good building. It's not... It's a little straight. It's slightly... I mean, it is and it isn't a success, I think.
Yeah.
I mean, this kind of tented form, which is sort of perhaps understandable because of the very compressed nature of the site, and the quality of the brick out of which it is made is impressive. But the interior is, I think, rather disturbing. So I don't think it's a success, that building.
But it's interesting that there is another Irish architect around
What
the
it
corner, which is
is.
the Grafton.
The Grafton, exactly, the Marshall Building, which is much more impressive, I think. The unbelievably brilliant use of structure, which they've done elsewhere. You know, they won this competition in Lima for a technical school, which they built also, and you know, that depended very much on the kind of structural, very expressive structural imagination. So, so I mean, if one tries to unpack the Irish scene, I think, you know, one finds a kind of richness. Again, I've never written that up either, you know.
Is there something that a scene is missing? Is there something that a scene the focused nature of the scene? I guess that's what makes it a culture, as you said earlier, the fact that that it's tangible.
Yeah.
I think what we suffer from in London is that it's not, the culture is not tangible because there's so much, it's so dispersed. But maybe there's a value in them. What's gained and what's lost in London as opposed to maybe a focus of Dublin?
You know, I think what I think has happened well, you know, I think, well, two kind of really unfortunate things, which is that probably surely one of the most brilliant architects of his generation in London is Tony Frampton.
Is
Tony Frampton.
Yes.
And it virtually built nothing here at all. You know, the great work is in the Netherlands or in Denmark. And what made Tony Frampton's life is to be appointed as professor of interior design at TU Delft. So from that point onwards, he had work in the Netherlands and in Denmark, where he did his best works. And in many ways, you know, the fate of David Chipperfield is very similar, like unbelievable, you know, got the Fisker Prize, unbelievably celebrated architect that has built all over Europe and particularly in Germany, you know, has nothing in England, you know, a house or two and the Henley River and Rowing Museum, you know.
And some, I guess, commercial buildings. One
Oh,
in...
well, which
yeah,
one?
there's a commercial building in King's Cross. There is a project. And
yeah, he did also I think the plan for King's
and
Cross.
Of course the museum.
Margate, or where is that?
Yes, it's somewhere.
I should go and see it. And the only practice of consequence that has built extensively in England is Caruso St. John, I think. And even then, their best building is their first building, I think. Like this Epstein Museum in Walsall, near Birmingham, right? Have you seen it?
No, I have.
I have to go and see it. I remember
Do you go and see do you go and see buildings? Do you have to see them before you make a judgment?
No, I mean, one should, of course, but no, I mean, I've committed the sin over and over again of taking a position and writing about buildings which I've never seen. So I'm not, in a way, it is of course kind of, you could say in a way unprincipled, but I don't.
I'm sure you look at the drawings, you look at the plans.
Yeah, I mean, exactly, the plans and the photographs together, and so.
Yes, Carlos Engineers said.
Well, I mean, I think the Warsaw Building. I remember the working drawings of the Warsaw Building when it first appeared.
But how do you say that they're the only? You mean architects of a certain generation that have built, or of course there's loads of architects that built in England.
Yes, they have, but they're not very interesting works. I mean, I think the most talented architects are not represented by their built work in this country.
Well, I guess Rogers have built that.
Oh no, Rogers. No, well, that's different. I mean, the whole
Hopkins,
British high-tech story. You see, that's also fascinating. I mean, I think that
yeah, it'd be nice to understand this.
It's fascinating because I think the two figures that were part of Team 4 at the beginning, i.e., Norman Foster and Richard Rogers, are split, rather early, and Rogers, in collaboration with Fiano, wins the competition for the Centre Pompidou. In many ways, the Centre Pompidou is like a kind of, at least as a project, a kind of built-out archigram building. If you look at the early projects, it's very archigram, and but in any event, the whole body of work produced by the British high-tech movement, you can all think of it as being Anglo-Italian in some respect because of the connection between Renzo and Richard. But that whole thing is represented and carried the energy of British building culture, for quite a substantial period of time after the New Brutalism. They occupied the center stage, I think, after the whole New Brutalism of Smithsons and Sterlings, and so. But then well, you see, that's very interesting because Chipperfield worked both for Norman Foster and for Richard Rogers when he graduated from BA, and clearly they were an inspiration to him, and he must have learned a lot working for them. But on the other hand, his expression is completely other. It's much more civic, in a way, civic and monumental than the high-tech culture was capable of expressing.
Well, I guess it's formally a modernist, classical in some respects.
Yes, that's right. So it's not involved with the ideology of technological dematerialization, which is what is true, I think, of even this is.
I mean, that's a fantastic project.
This is a late manifestation because it's no longer really Richard Rogers, I don't think. But anyway,
it's a bit more subtle.
Anyway, how are we doing with this?
Good. I think we're covering the ground, surprisingly, but
yeah, okay.
Yeah, I think we are. I think we are because I think we're actually making certain connections that I think are quite useful.
Yeah, okay. It's very interesting. I think the difference between the difference and the absence is how I would put it. The absence of Fretton and Chipperfield from the British scene. Hopkins is a transitional figure in a way because Though Hopkins was close, if you think of Hopkins' own family house in Hampstead, it's very high tech. It's a beautiful house.
I think it's also on a kind of level of thinking about even family is very progressive. I mean, it's basically all the spaces are divided with blinds.
By blinds.
Yes. I think on many levels, it's actually such an unconventional even idea of how a family will live together,
Well, isn't that fascinating? Because I didn't realize that. And I saw it recently, from the outside. I've been once in it, but I didn't realize the extent to which that fluidity was present. But what I think is interesting, however, is that Hopkins becomes more conventional as the practice goes on.
Yeah, I think that's maybe, sorry to take you back to, and I think we should in a way move on from talking so much about Kahn and that influence. But what's interesting about Neil is that Neil was saying how, of course, there is an element of influence, and Neil actually emphasized the joinery, the Kahnian joinery, as something that's really transferred from Kahn to Shane to then himself. And he said that maybe he's less drawn to the sort of big gestures in Kahn.
Right. Well, intrinsically, the language is not so monumental.
Yeah.
I mean, because this use of the light timber frame mainly is
White Americano? That's for me. Yeah.
is not so monumental. And yes, please. Yeah, and so that already distanced him from Kahn. And there is this building in Cambridge, which is Magdalen, is it?
Yeah, Magdalen, exactly. The library that
Yeah.
he wants.
Yeah, where there is a kind of uneasy relationship, I think, between the framing and the masonry infill. But it's not Kahnian. It ultimately the building is I think of it as a framed work. Probably could be said to be partly inspired by kind of Tudor building. And
Yeah, it has that.
Yeah, it does.
Weight. Yeah.
It does. But in the sense that that it's a wooden frame but infilled, which is not Ghanaian at all, because for Khan the wall is and the wall is not a wall if it's inside a frame, inside a timber frame above all, So
another interesting thing in this conversation about acknowledging the influence of other architects in this conversation with Neil was that he told me about when Reba gave the gold medal to Zumthor. And Zumthor gave this long lecture without mentioning a single other architect. And really rejecting any idea of any either influence or reference. And Neil said that he even tried after the lecture to ask him about it, and he said, well, it's curious that you simply haven't mentioned any reference. You talk about childhood memories, etc., but you don't really talk about any reference. And Neil said that Zumthor just didn't necessarily want to talk about it at all, and completely.
Yeah.
It's interesting that there seems to be an actor out there that maybe operates a bit more like an artist.
Yes, I mean there is that dimension in Zumthor, I think, and yeah, I haven't thought about it. I mean, it I know him a little bit, but and in fact there is a film.
Have you met and spoken to him?
Yeah, I have. There's a film also made by Blackwood.
Okay.
That's the last film that Blackwood and I made together. One in his house in Harlestein. with Zumthor.
And how did you find him?
Well, he has this. He's a somewhat cranky person, and I knew that for, from a long time ago. It's interesting, that his it's curious he doesn't. I don't think he does allude to it. His emergence as an architect is preceded by working, in historic preservation for Heimatschutz organizations, for a long time. So he had, in a sense, he'd been trained in, technologically speaking, in restoring old buildings, and yeah, I mean, but I think you're right in observing, that the approach is closer to that of an artist. I'm thinking in particular of this, what's it called, this concrete chapel where
Yes.
where the logs make it, and they burnt, right? And
Somewhere in Germany.
yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, that's very much like a work of an artist.
Yeah.
And
another interesting thing that I could kind of transfer as a prompt for a reaction from you is Neil's kind of observation, and maybe this can link us back to teaching and education. Neil's observation of the sort of early 90s having this real emphasis on individuality of an architect. And in architecture school, it all became about what you smell and feel, and projects emerge, not necessarily as a response to a long train of historical links, but and I just wonder whether there's also a connection there to be made with postmodernism.
oh, no question.
Is exactly what it rejects, the idea of uniformity.
Yes, no, I think well, it in a certain sense, it rejects the idea, in a funny way, of the project, but the only way to get at that is to interpret the word project in a broader sense, And someone who has had an enormous influence on me is Alvaro Ziza, who not only architecturally but also in terms of a critical mind. And yes, I had once this exchange with Alvaro, which involves me writing to him saying, I hear you have a lot of projects, and then I say that rather banal thing, but you must be very happy or something like that. And he wrote back to me saying, it's true I have many projects, but I'm not happy. How can we be happy when Europe has no project? And that blew me away, this response. But I realized that that's using the word project in a bigger sense, in the sense of the Enlightenment, actually, of the German Enlightenment, in the sense of building a society, And of course, it's very critical to say Europe has no project, because you could say, well, Europe, the European Union was a kind of project, etc., etc., and
it drove a lot of architectural,
and in a way still is
as well.
Yeah. Yes, and well, I was very involved with it in the sense that I was involved for a long time in the European Prize for Architecture. And in fact, one of the early prizes we gave was to Alvaro Ziza for a particular building, for a bank in, no, I can't remember this town, but one of his banks. And
yeah, back to this point about project individuality.
Yeah, the question of project, because and also the problem of individuality in relation to what that might mean. Because yeah, okay, this gets to be very complicated. I mean, I'm working right now, and this afternoon I have to go back to it, on writing an introduction to an essay published in 1982 by Dmitri Porphyrius with the slightly misleading title Sources of Modern Eclecticism. But the subtitle makes it clear that these are kind of study of alto alto. And the whole thing gets to be very complicated. But
what's complicated about this?
well, I mean, well, particularly in the light of what I've just said about project. But I can come back to it, and
but I wonder, is the complication in the kind of blurred boundaries between individual, collective?
Yeah, well, somewhere there, yeah, there. And well, yes, okay. I mean, what makes it complicated is the relationship between alto and technology. Well, actually, you can say the relationship between alto technology on one side and alto and politics on the other. Because alto has misgivings about both, His misgivings about politics is that he's not, he's very uneasy about the left-wing, the ultra left-wing socialist project, the kind of the utopianism of the socialist stroke communist project. And what was I saying? There's policy and technology, and he is anxious about technology in as much as industrialization, the impact of industrialization on Western society has been so traumatic in a way, And so he rejects, for example, the organization of buildings in terms of coherent modular parts. So therefore, the whole high-tech thing, though the high-tech thing occurs after his time, more or less, the whole high-tech thing would have been an anathema to him. Because he was once asked, I think, what is the module of your buildings? And he said, 1 brick or less, which means it wasn't a module in the modular prefabricated sense. And so
there is no module in a sense.
In his work there isn't.
Yeah.
His work there isn't. And there is more of a module in Chipperfield's work, for example, where the rational classical thing produces a kind of modularity, But you don't find that expression in alto, really. This kind of the rational classical doesn't.
Yeah, but
doesn't
it's
appear.
more plastic, right? It's
more plastic,
yeah.
Absolutely, and more related. That explains the title about Porphyrius' title about eclecticism, because alto is working with a sort of longer idea of building history, the history of building, as opposed to technological modularity. He's more concerned with what is the legacy from the medieval period, but also from the arts and crafts period, et cetera, of the history of built form, almost in opposition to the reduction of built form's technological modularity. And so it's sort of it's partly an ideological question, Anyway,
there's a real emergence of vernacularity now.
Well, In the present, you mean?
Yes, in the
Yes.
present.
Well, it's related to that emergence.
Yes, I wonder whether it's related to altos and.
Well, it's related to altos, like the history of building in that broad sense, did of course involve the vernacular, and so in that sense, the vernacular is integrated with the alto organic form, well, the brick vernacular, the wooden vernacular, etc. Well, of course, it takes us. You see, it takes us back to Finnish national romanticism. Yeah, because it is a line of Finnish national romanticism which is coming through to alto, and that line has its origin in strange enough in America in Henry Hobson Richardson. And I mean, that's all fascinating because Richardson, although he goes to the École des Beaux-Arts, brings back to America this imagined idea of a kind of medieval culture, out of stone and brick, mainly, and exactly that's what determines his whole building career, and it's very extensive, and of course it then is Sullivan and then Wright that are carrying the line from Richardson, but apart from this, that the Richardson in his own lifetime influences national romanticism in Finland or in Scandinavia altogether. But in Finland it has a particularly dense form, and alto is clearly related to that, and so alto's work is in its own way sort of involved with the national romantic idea. It's still alive when he comes into his own maturity as an architect. So well, all this makes things very complicated, but then in that sense architecture is very, it has this it's extremely synthetic cultural activity, which involves many levels of expression and articulation, I think, and so it is then able to embody certain kind of well, it brings us back to the word project, in the broadest sense of that term, which not only the project of, the project of a limited building, but also the larger contextual project of what is it that is intended, at the level of the society. And this is, I mean, in a way you can say that Brexit was very counterproductive for the British, because it, of course, was a product of and involved, a categoric separation from the European, from Alvaro Siza despair about Europe having no project. Well, the British just simply separated out from it, to their, not only to their economic loss, I think, also to their cultural loss. And I find it intriguing that certain British architects, like Surtees and Bates and Caruso St. John, partly exported themselves to Switzerland, so that.
And Germany.
Yeah. Yes. Well, Surtees is living in Zurich but teaching in Mendrisio, and Caruso is living in Glahus, I think, and teaching in Zurich. So they definitely are immigrants. So so and why would they do that? I mean, why would what is that all about? You know, in terms of maybe it's a coincidental manifestation, but I think,
or a business strategy.
hey, what is a business strategy? But you can also say that a business strategy, in the sense that the culture, the culture of the country, i.e., this right here, you know, doesn't promise anything, you know. And I mean, that's also, as it happens, you know, part of the Labour Party's policy in the very recent election. I mean, Labour doesn't really promise anything to anybody. It's almost with a matter of pride that Starmer declares the fact that we're not promising anything, you know, which is a very peculiar thing.
But also he's also quite against ideology, which also quite interesting, right?
Yeah, right. Well, you know, well, he means, of course, I suppose, socialism. But, you know, socialism in that sense, you know, I think he means that, you know, in order to, you know, will command the support of the conservative body of, you know, of the British, you know. I mean, that was perhaps the gain. But in any case, you know, it's part of a very
maybe it's another ideology, not maybe it's it's an emergence of a new ideology.
Well,
that
whatever.
actually,
Yeah.
there's
I mean,
some level, some form of pragmatism, right? But actually, ideology is not a productive.
Well, it's close to a kind of laissez-faire, you know, to a laissez-faire attitude towards the future, you know. I mean, let's see what they do. Of course, if they do, in fact, come through with their housing program, I mean, then that will tell a different story, but I don't know what
it's interesting, this view, Kenneth, because in a way it's really projects, right? You get this, I don't know when that church would have been built.
Oh, very early. Cromwell got married in that church.
Oh, right. So what's that?
Pre-17th century. It's like 16th century or 15th century.
And then we have Barbican wrapping around it, and then we have a very sort of 90s clad this
beyond.
Yes, just on the left, and then we have Rogers in the middle.
Yeah, right.
And sorry to keep referencing my conversation with Neil, who's painting a picture of the world where we're all almost working on the same project. The way Neil talks about culture and culture of the profession, there's a sense that we're all working on one big project or one big building or something like that.
Yeah, well,
but then the view is almost
something
different.
Yeah. Well, you know, there's a book of mine which is called Studies in Tectonic Culture. Do you know this book? And I mean, that's a reaction against postmodernism, you know. And there it tries to develop a discourse which is about, you know, the poetics of construction. That is really, you know, its underlying issue is the poetics of construction. And I still think that is, well, and also, for instance, this when you look at alto, and for that matter also Khan, but the expression is quite different. You know, there is in both of them a poeticness of construction. So this issue of the poetic of construction, I think, is still a very important point of departure, you know.
But are Khan and Alto the right people to look at if we talk about poetics of construction? Because I think they're very much like this view. They're one building and then another and then another.
Right.
I mean, could be looking at Florence.
No, I mean, that's what's fascinating.
The kind of
at the end,
100 years of construction of Münster in Ulm.
Yes, I mean, yes, well, it's a good response. I mean, but you know, at the end of studies in tectonic culture, there's the chapter which is has the title Tectonic Trajectory, and there I bring in, you know, also Norman Foster. Who else? I mean, certainly Norman, but also, I mean, I think in the same summation chapter, I'm talking about both Farah Fenn, for example, and Norman Foster, you know, as a kind of as both contributing to this tectonic trajectory, by which I mean, of course, poetics of construction, but the manner of that poetic is different, of course, from Sverre Fenn to Norman Foster. It's not the same, and well, you know, and if you add to that to these two figures, Alto, you you arrive at another figure where the I mean, you know, you could say that in all three cases, Alto, Fenn, and Foster, there is a different attitude towards technology, but despite the difference of the attitude, there is also a poetic in terms of the way the work is made, you know, in each case. You know. And we can critically talk about what is the range of that poetic, or what is the latent context of that poetic, etc., etc. I think that could open out in that way, but what they have in common, though, is that the actual articulation of the structure is crucial in all three cases. You know, so that you know,
you mean the question of how is this going to be built?
Yes, right, and also what emerges out of the act of building. You know, so that, for example, you know, in Alto's work, you know, there is kind of different manifestations of the column. The column is part of the discourse, you know, even though it is not. It's not as though it's a rationalist framework in the if you're Terani or David Chipperfield sense of the term. You know, it's not. The column doesn't appear in that context, but the column definitely appears in his work, you know, and gives a particular expressive force in the work, you know, I think. I mean, right now I'm, as I said, I'm trying to write this introduction to the republication of this thesis by Porphyrius about Alto. And I have my hands full with that.
Yeah.
And then after that, you know, I'm being pressed by the Serbian couple to try to develop okay. Maybe I tell you one other thing. You know, there is this book which is not that well known, but is a record of a course that they gave in the United States. Maybe throughout my whole teaching there, which was called Comparative Critical Analysis of Built Form, and it's published by Lars Muller under the title The Genealogy of Architecture, I think. A Genealogy of Architecture. And the subtitle is Comparative Critical Analysis. And in that book, there's a kind of philosophical, I think I call it philosophical excursus, but anyway, it's a section where I try to make, or I try to justify why certain philosophical formulations are of significance to me. And the key figure in all of this is Hannah Arendt's The Human Condition. But through a long kind of autodidact process which never stops as long as one continues to live. I realized that the key figure that has to be put there by the side of Hannah Arendt is Maurice Merleau-Ponty.
Yes.
You know, and so basically I have to.
Well, we come back to phenomenology.
We do, exactly. So the project, in terms of my own projects, is after working on this alto piece, I have to work on the phenomenological piece for two reasons. One, for the Serbian, because they want me to somehow use it as a springboard for an issue on phenomenology.
I see. Yeah.
Inviting other people to contribute, and also because I need to revise this part in the book on comparative critical analysis, about what is the philosophical ground, so to speak. And why is that? Because I asked the students to compare certain canonical works, particularly from the point of view of analyzing the hierarchical order of public, private, and semi-public space within two buildings that they are comparing, of the same programmatic type.
Okay. Yeah.
And but as part of the analysis, I also talk about, I think I use the word connotational analysis, which is always alluding to the material, and mainly light material, and
environment.
Yeah,
environmental factors.
Yeah, but yes, and so in effect alluding to the phenomenological dimensions, and so that the philosophical treatment in the prologue is imbalanced in the sense that I don't talk about that, in the prologue. So that's the next. So in a way, this kind of emerging task to write something on phenomenology has two motives, really, So that's the way I find myself at the moment.
Well, I think it's something that maybe we haven't so much talked about, is education,
yes, right.
education, and you've just taken me to the very task that you give students. It's a kind of education that I guess we don't encounter so much, at least in this country. And I just wonder how you, I guess you, of course, you studied at the AATE and taught in both, I taught in many places across the world, but do you think of the state of architectural education?
Do I ever?
Yeah.
I mean, constantly.
And
well, I mean, I think it's very disturbing at the moment. And
what's the disturbing thing?
Oh, yeah, right. Well, one thing is that architecture has become kind of a bit swamped by discourses that are not that are in a way outside the field. I mean, if we take the case of the School of Architecture, which I left behind, i.e. Columbia, the discourse in Columbia is absolutely obsessed with racial justice and with sustainability and all these kind of issues that are not pertaining to building qua building,
The form.
Hmm?
The form. I mean, they're not engaged with.
They're not. Well, they're not really engaged with the. See,
I think my issue with that is that the translation of that to form is a joke. When you bring in a kind of social angle or a kind of political angle, I think personally, there is a value in engaging with these questions because we operate in a context But the strange thing is when these things are kind of forced into an architectural response, which is something strange.
Yes, I mean, well, first of all, you
And I
know,
don't know
part of the strangeness is to do with the fact that these dysfunctions in the society, you know, if one can formulate it like that, you know, the dysfunction in the sense that despite climate change, basically the society is kind of paralyzed or passive as a totality before the reality of climate change, you know, and though, you know, according to Chipperfield, you know, building is in and of itself responsible for 36% of the carbon footprint, you know, which is very high, you know. It's hard to see how one can do something about that. Of course, one of the things one can do about it is to not build new buildings, but to restore and convert existing buildings so that the carbon footprint is reduced by virtue of this policy, you know, theoretically anyway, you know. And and the issue of well, you know, of course the political is relevant, and it's clear that a lot of the problems in society, for example, well, quite obviously homelessness and maldistribution of wealth, you know, have fundamental political origins. You know, they're all beginning, you know, more or less with the election of Ronald Reagan to the presidency of the United States. In other words, the neoliberal policies followed by the U.S. and also, well, by the conservative government over the last 14 years, you know, has been incredibly destructive from the point of view of the coherence of the society, you know. But the idea that on both sides of the Atlantic, but architecture should be able to do something about this, or should even have the responsibility, or should assume the responsibility of doing something about it.
Haven't we always spoken about everything? You know,
no, that's true,
from
but
Vitruvius.
but not to the point of evacuating the capacity to work.